This is the IBJ podcast for the week of Monday, October 14th, 2024, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. As we've discussed on previous editions of the podcast, the LEAP Research and Innovation District, under development near Lebanon, about 35 miles northwest of Indianapolis, represents a shift in the way economic development officials are working to attract companies to Indiana and create jobs. It has detractors who have objected to the strategy by the Indiana Economic Development Corporation to corner thousands of acres of rural land for the project. Some are highly skeptical about the impact of channeling tens of millions of gallons of water per day to the site for its tenants. You could argue that the thing giving LEAP the most sizzle and credibility right now is its future anchor tenant, Indianapolis-based pharmaceutical giant Eli Lilly and Co. In total, Lilly has committed to investing more than $13 billion in its facilities and activities at the district. It has revealed its plans over 4 announcements in the last 2.5 years, with the most recent coming earlier this month, a $4.5 billion project called the Lilly Medicine Foundry. But where the previous investments were all about manufacturing, this latest announcement is more about research. The so-called foundry will be focused on making new medicines better and faster, while also increasing capacity for clinical trial medicines. The state of Indiana plans to support the new site with infrastructure improvements for roads, water, electricity, and other utilities. The state also offered undisclosed incentives tied to Lilly's investment and employment goals in Lebanon. But there are many potential payoffs for Hoosiers, including this. The foundry is expected to add 400 full-time jobs for highly skilled workers who will include engineers, scientists, operation personnel, and lab technicians. In this week's edition of the podcast, IBJ healthcare reporter John Russell puts it all into context and explores in greater depth the potential impact of the foundry as Lilly hovers near a milestone that would make it one of the most valuable companies in the United States. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast John Russell, who covers the business of healthcare for IBJ. John, thanks for making time today.
Glad to be here.
So I want to provide some context for this news for investors who have been living under a rock for the last year. Eli Lilly and Company's market value is very close to $1 trillion. Did it ever pass $1 trillion, or did it just get close?
It hasn't yet. It kind of edged back down for a little bit. It's now flirting with it again. But yeah, $1 trillion would be a big deal. That would put it up with the big tech companies.
Yeah, that's like unicorn level. There aren't that many.
7, I think, up there with Apple and Amazon and those big boys.
So in the summer of 2023, its market value was a little bit over $500 million. Its rise in total stock value has been correlated with many of the new drugs Lilly has introduced to the market in the last several years. Tell me, just in general, about the growth of Lilly's drug pipeline.
For years, Lilly had a reputation of having one of the slowest and least productive pipelines in the industry. This was the bad old days around the post-Prozac years. They were very slow. It would take them 13 to 15 years to get a drug from discovery to market, which put them in almost last place. But in the last 10 years, roughly, they've really increased their output and increased their speed and increased their determination. They're now one of the fastest and most productive pipelines in the drug industry, with drugs all over the map. At last count, they had 60 drugs in pipeline for a wide range of diseases, from breast cancer and diabetes to Alzheimer's disease and cardiovascular disease. So it's a night and day situation.
And when I think about drugs, I mean, the drugs that I take, the legal drugs that I take, are all pills. And that's like the old way, right? Lilly is now involved in all different kinds of, they call them modalities. Is that right? Or
That's right. Modality just means the form that the medicine is used in. It can be a pill. It can be an injection. It can be an infusion, as this former cancer patient knows all too well. It can be gene therapy. And to make it even more complex, you can combine several of those modalities. You can have a pill with an antibody, or with some of these new drugs for radiopharmaceutical cancer drugs, they combine a targeting molecule that delivers radiation directly to cancer cells. So it's getting more complex. So when you multiply the increasing volume in Lilly's pipeline with the increasing complexity of these drugs, you can see why it's a major, major area of activity and interest and investment for Lilly.
Now, a lot of the excitement in the last couple of years has been focused on Mounjaro and Zepbound. I see Mounjaro commercials all the time. I still can't tell you what it is. Give us a refresher on what those two drugs are.
Mounjaro is, well, they both share the same active ingredient, active pharmaceutical ingredient called tirzepatide. They just have different names, different brands, and with slightly different dosages and marketing. Mounjaro came out first about 3 years ago, and it's injection for type 2 diabetes, which also has the included benefit of weight reduction. And when Lilly saw this, they decided to market it as an obesity treatment too, which they called Zepbound, which they launched in December. So between the two of them, these drugs have just skyrocketed. So Zepbound had sales of $1.2 billion in the second quarter of this year. So that's already in blockbuster territory. In a quarter.
Oh, my God.
So it's already in blockbuster territory, less than a year on the market. Mounjaro did even better. Their sales in the second quarter were $3 billion, making it Lilly's top-selling drug. So these are big deals for Lilly, for doctors, and for patients.
And Lilly made its name on diabetes treatment. Am I right? I mean, they know diabetes. How did they just come up with another way of treating it?
Yeah, I mean, they did make their mark almost a century ago with diabetes treatments, with a whole portfolio of insulins. They were probably the leader in the industry, and this brings them back. If they ever fell out of first place, they're certainly up there again. In fact, the demand for these drugs has been so sharp that there was a temporary shortage of both drugs earlier this year. Doctors and patients just have really sworn by them for effectiveness, plus the added benefit of weight reduction. So the shortages have appeared to be waning, and Lilly says they're now available. The FDA said this week or last week that they're off the shortages list.
So we had the two themes that you mentioned. We have the volume of drugs being sold and the complexity of the drugs being sold. And that takes us to the LEAP Research and Innovation District in Boone County, though I think we just kind of shorthand that as Lebanon, don't we?
Lebanon is the city or village. I'm not sure. I don't make it up to Lebanon that often.
I'm fairly certain that the mayor would call it a city.
Okay. Let's call it a city that has, I believe, been growing by annexing surrounding farmland and providing a lot of land for this innovation district.
For folks who don't know, Lebanon is about 30 miles just northwest of where we are right now in downtown Indianapolis. In this manufacturing and research hub that we call LEAP, Lilly is planning major increases to its manufacturing capacity and its ability to speed drugs to market. We are in danger of suffering from Lilly Leap fatigue because it seems like there's an announcement every 6 months, sometimes even closer than that. So I want to real quick just go through, just over the course of maybe about 28 months, how Lilly's presence, or at least planned presence, has gone from zero to more than $13 billion. With the news last week, there have been 4 major announcements of billion-dollar Lilly projects at the site since May 2022. The cost of all these, again, I said, is about $13.5 billion. So we start with May 2022. Lilly says it would invest $2.1 billion. Immense number, big number for Indiana.
That would have been big enough to make a lot of people happy. The governor, the mayor, the people who put these kinds of deals together for the state. But just the beginning.
So the idea is to have 2 new manufacturing sites in the LEAP district. The purpose is to expand Lilly's manufacturing network for the active ingredients and for new drugs and other therapies. And Lilly says new operations would create 500 jobs. Huge. I mean, these are exactly the kind of jobs that state leaders talk about. high skill, high knowledge jobs. And boom, there it is, one of your founding anchor tenants in the Leap. We'll call it a business park, even though it's much more than that. In April 2023, Lilly announced it would spend another $1.6 billion to add to the plans for the 2 manufacturing sites and thus adding 200 more jobs. Lilly said that the huge expansion was needed to keep up with expected growing demand. There's that demand theme again for its pharmaceutical products over the next decade. In May of this year, Lilly said that it was overwhelmed, as you said, by demand for its Mounjaro and Zepbound, and thus needed to invest another $5.3 billion in this burgeoning manufacturing complex.
Right. At that point, they were under real pressure from patients, from doctors, from pharmacies all over the country. Where's my Zepbound? Where's my Mounjaro? Where's many other drugs? And Lilly couldn't keep up. And you can't just flick a switch and there's, twice the output. You've got to build a factory, which takes 2 or 3 years. So Lilly is just pushing as fast as it can to get these things up and running and get the medicines out the door so they don't get in this jam again in the future.
So as of May, we had 3 projects. We had about $9 billion in total investment, about 900 full-time jobs in an area that covers about 600 acres. I want to jump back to the jobs again real quick. Can you be a little more specific about these jobs? These aren't just people who are like cleaning the clean rooms.
No, these are extremely high-skilled, high-salary, white-collar jobs. They're scientists, they're engineers, they're computer experts, they're lab techs, they're operations people. These are the types of jobs, right, that mayors and governors dream about on good nights with 6-figure salaries.
That brings us to last week. $4.5 billion investment announced. Now, this is a little bit different from just saying this is manufacturing. The project is called the Lilly Medicine Foundry. And while that sounds like manufacturing, what is really supposed to happen there? What is the purpose of this?
Right. So foundry means something completely different to me and maybe others. I grew up in Cleveland, which was an industrial manufacturing town, and a foundry is a place where you cast metals.
That's right. If you grew up in Kokomo, you thought the same thing.
Right. I think Lilly is just sort of like borrowing that phrase or that word to give a little romance to their medicine operation, which is not heating up metals, but is discovering new ways to make medicine faster, including these extremely complex medicines we've described, and also to make batches of medicines for their clinical trials. They have many more trials going underway than I realized, and they were outsourcing a lot of this small batches for human testing, and they decided to bring that back in-house with this foundry.
Yeah, as you mentioned before, Lilly got into a bit of a rut, I guess you would call it, where it was taking 13 years to go from like the ideation of a drug to getting it on the shelves. Now it's maybe closer to a decade, but they want to do it even faster. I mean, this is an R&D facility for making it go faster. That's
right. I don't know how much faster you can do. I mean, it takes years for this process to happen traditionally. Can they cut that in half? I mean, they've already cut several years off of it. It'd be interesting to keep an eye on, see how much quicker they can do it.
And as you mentioned, too, there's also for producing medicines that would be used in medical trials. And as a guy who had cancer, as we mentioned at the top, and I think those of us who've researched cancers before know, there are a blue million trials going on at all times. And sometimes it's just like minuscule differences between trial and trial and trial and trial. But in any given time, there are like 100,000 people going through trials.
Yeah, that's the number Lilly gave out last week of how many people that one company has in clinical trials right now. If you think about it, that's equivalent to the population of Carmel or South Bend. The whole town is in the clinic. But it's not really a laughing matter. I mean, they're trying to come up with new ways to find treatments and cures for very serious diseases. And sometimes it's just a matter of getting the dose right. If it's not 5 milligrams that's working, can we try 10 milligrams? And will that work? But you've got to go through this whole process with the FDA just to get a new trial approved at a higher dose. I mean, these are expensive trials, by the way. I remember John Lechleiter, their former CEO, saying that every time he holds a clinical trial, or his company does, it costs as much as building Lucas Oil Stadium.
Wow. I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Was that $700 million?
Yeah, 800 some, yeah.
So they need to have as many failures early on as possible and weed out the drugs that just don't have a good chance, so they only have the very best candidates going forward.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast and our interview with John Russell about plans for the Lilly Medicine Foundry. Now, in terms of the physical space of the foundry, what is this place going to look like?
For anyone who's been up to Lebanon Leap District, and Lilly's got the biggest presence of cranes in the sky, to my knowledge, they're still the only ones that are building. Although there are some signed contracts that haven't been announced yet for that district. So it's immense. I went up there earlier this year. It was 600 acres, and it took me 15 minutes to get from the gate to the building I wanted to get through on winding dirt roads. Now this one, and that was all east of I-65. This will be the first presence west of 65. So it's pushing the district to the west and expanding Lilly's footprint from 600 to 800 acres. But what will this particular place look like? It'll be a small village, really. It's 7 large buildings on a contained campus measuring 1.2 million square feet. So, I mean, there's offices, research facilities, laboratories, manufacturing sites, and probably places to eat and to have a little recreation, because there's nothing else close by. So it's in a pioneer land right now.
Again, with the jobs, the expansion here is expected to add 400 full-time jobs. This could be engineers, I think 200 scientists, I think is the number I heard, operations personnel, lab technicians. One of the most common things that we talk about in this podcast is Indiana's trouble recruiting people to fill highly skilled jobs for Indiana-based employers. Now, is Lilly an exception to this? I mean, is their global reach able to just, pull people off the shelf wherever you are in the globe? Or is Lilly also going to struggle like some other employers do?
I wouldn't say they're going to struggle. They're going to do better than a lot of smaller companies. They've got bigger salaries. They've got bigger prestige. They've got a brand that will attract scientists from around the country and around the world. In the meantime, Lilly has been trying to do what it can to get the Hoosier workforce well equipped for this, to add to their headcount. They've been working with a lot of partners, colleges and universities and vo-ed schools to do training or scholarships, internship programs, just to try and get people thinking about this kind of work. So I think between the two of them, they would say that it's an issue they deal with, but it's not something that's going to keep them from going.
So let's go back to the stock angle, the valuation angle. What do analysts who cover the pharmaceutical industry say about the upside for this project?
The numbers are just dizzying. Most of the analysts who follow Lilly have a buy or a strong buy on the stock. There are a few holds, but mostly a very bullish flock of analysts who follow them, even though their stock is close to $900 range. That's an expensive stock. When I started covering them at another publication about 20 years ago, they were in the 2-digit range.
Oh, for sure. I remember, yeah.
And I just wrote a story when I started at the IBJ in 2016 about to have 38% to be talking about 40-something%. Those are operating margins, so you still have to deduct a lot of the other costs, but those are still the kinds of things that make financial people sit up and take notice.
I want to go back again to about 2.5 years ago, right before the first announcement that we had about the Leap District, and add a little bit of context to all of this planned development. In April 2022, Lilly CEO Dave Ricks told an audience at an Economic Club of Indiana luncheon that the state was falling short in education skills, the affordability of healthcare, green energy policies, workforce development, and inclusion of minorities and immigrants. And some people took that as a warning that the state needed to improve in these areas for Lilly to consider further investment in the state. Were you at that lunch?
I was at that lunch. I think I was the only press reporter at that lunch. I think there might have been a TV station, but they were just getting sound bites, quick sound bites. Yeah, that was a real eye-opener. I went back and wrote that right up when we posted it online. That was an amazing, usually CEOs will stand up and do a blah, blah, blah kind of a speech and careful not to step on anyone's toes or say anything that might offend, but he was taking a swing at everyone. Yeah, I was at that lunch, and it was a shot that was heard around Indiana. And I think we followed up with at least 2 big follow stories on talking to people in industry and in government, economic development around the state. And they agreed that what Rick said, he said it, but everyone else should have been saying it all along.
Yeah, and just for folks who maybe aren't familiar with Indiana, Lilly is arguably, maybe not even arguably, the most important corporate citizen in the state by far. There's so many different tendrils that are related to Lilly all over the state. Besides employing, 11,000 people, 12,000 people. It's Indianapolis, you could say, is the city that Lilly built. So for him to come out with that kind of bravado, it was really rare.
He'll stick by those words if you ask him, but he hasn't made a similar speech since.
Now, what I thought was interesting about that in retrospect now is a month later, and certainly Dave Ricks knew this, they were announcing a $2.1 billion investment in Indiana. And not Indianapolis, but in rural Indiana.
Right. Well, I think to set up his comments, some people's noses might have been out of joint a little bit because the previous several big investment announcements that Lilly had made in the previous year or two had all been in North Carolina or in Europe. And it's like, when are you going to invest in Indy? Are you still committed to Indy? Are you planning to move the headquarters? People were wanting some reassurance. And I don't know how far in advance these things are planned. Or I think it's probably months and years, but he had to have known that, you would think. At the
that
time
was a
he
message
made that
that he wanted to impart before the message that we're investing $2.1 billion and then another 1.6, I guess, within a few months.
I know. Just as you went through all the investments in Boone County, it's just like boom, 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 up to $13.5 billion just a few years after that speech.
So when is the foundry expected to open?
Yeah, well, they're going to break ground as soon as possible, and they say it's going to open in 2027. That's the same year they say that, so the surrounding farmland, which Lilly is now building its huge manufacturing plant on, is also scheduled to open in 2027. So foundry is like a year behind the start, but it seems like a faster build.
And you say Lilly has started construction on some of the other projects that previously announced.
Yeah, they've got like 20 cranes in the sky the last time I looked. So they've got 2 separate side-by-side manufacturing operations that they're building, along with support buildings for utility plants and so forth. But one is for their traditional medicines, and the other is for the higher tech modalities that we were describing before. It would probably take you 20 minutes to walk from one to the other, but there's hundreds of construction workers up there. Some of them are even working around the clock. Well, not any one person, but they're trying to get that thing up and it's running as fast as they can. You can see it when you drive past it on 65. You can just see the thing growing.
I'm sorry to say you will not be covering Lilly for IBJ after what?
Why? What's going on?
You didn't know. HR didn't tell you. You're leaving, John.
I am leaving, but happily of my own choice.
Yes.
And not something that normally happens in the news business.
I know. You did it your way.
So I'm retiring at the end of the year after 40 years in this racket, including 9 happy years here at IBJ. So I'll be continuing to follow all these issues and follow the IBJ and wishing everybody the very best.
Do you have a great American novel you wish to produce? You're going to follow up on some episodes of Columbo?
I got several novels and books, general nonfiction mostly, that I'd love to read. I haven't had time to read. I've got a list of house projects a half mile long. I've got gardens which have been neglected. And I've got some friends I'd love to see around the country. So that's going to be year one. And then we'll see if IBJ is hiring again.
We'll see. It wouldn't be the first time. Oh, my gosh. Myself included. We'll leave it at that, I suppose. But, boy, for whatever amount of time you're not at the IBJ, we're going to miss you.
Thanks, Mason. I appreciate you having me on your podcast 8 or 10 times over the years. I always enjoy it.
My thanks again to John Russell. If you'd like to learn more about Lilly's plans for the Medicine Foundry, you can check out John's story in the latest issue of IBJ. And before you get on with the rest of your week, there are a few other stories and features in this week's print edition I'd like to draw to your attention. First up, Don Tavel was an inventor who created a groundbreaking music synthesizer called the Resonator before dying in a 1988 car crash. Dave Lindquist explains how Tavel's daughter, Allison, has used the Resonator as a focus point to learn more about the father she lost when she was just 10 weeks old. Also in this week's issue, the founder and CEO of Wild Birds Unlimited discusses the decision to transfer ownership to employees. And the latest issue of IBJ's Forefront magazine is all about the upcoming election, the candidates, and the big issues. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or, of course, online at ibj.com. I will say it is quite a bit easier to access all of the latest business news and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business community and economy if you're a subscriber. We're running a promotion right now that gives you complete access for $1 per week for 3 months just to get a sense of how valuable and original our content is. Just go to ibj.com and click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.